a great example is we started working with, well, it's an adult toy company, and they were experiencing
Products are
high,
products.
yeah, products and products, right? And and they were experiencing some higher levels of returns, and they actually engaged us to actually help them deal with all the returns.
You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guests about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Back across the pond. CX Passport goes through these phases where there's a particular part of the world that just seems to be heavily emphasized. It's just the schedule works out that way, and some parts of the world show it more often than others. And recently, the show's been in a very heavy USA phase, so it's nice, just like a good holiday trip, to get out of my own borders and get a different perspective on customer experience and on life in general. Today, we get the chance to do exactly that. What would it be like if to be exposed to a wide variety of industries in your day-to-day role? Think about what you'd be able to learn and also what you'd be able to leverage when working with others. Today we're going to hear from Tshili Khupe, Head of Strategic Partnerships and Growth at LTVplus. Coming to us today from London, England. I'm very excited to have a chance to talk with someone in one of my favorite cities in the world. He works in exactly that space where he gets the opportunity to help clients across the globe through an outsourcing relationship. Imagine, too, the wealth of customer insight that's available when you're there at the front line of customer experience creation. How can a company do this right? We'll hear about Tshili's experiences and learn the right way to do this. And folks, come on. Of course we're going to have some travel talk as well. Fear not. Tshili, welcome to CX Passport.
Thanks, Rick, and it's great to be here.
I am, I've mentioned, I just love getting to talk with folks. Isn't that great? That's just one of the things that's so fascinating about this. And it's become so normal that having a conversation while I sit here in North Texas and you in London, England, you'd be anywhere in the globe. And yeah, I realize that we're kind of numb to it at this point, but I still find myself finding it fascinating and great. So I'm glad that we're having this chance to have this conversation today. Tshili, I talk a ton, and listeners already are probably saying these words before I've even said them yet. But it's my mantra. This total voice of the customer approach is stop, survey, and score, start, listen, and act. Well, listen is where that starts, right? So what does listen to the customer mean to you?
Great question, Rick. So I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and in my role, of course, we talk about listening to the voice of the customer. Now, a lot of brands actually mistake listening to the voice of the customer as being, I'm going to send out a CSAT score or a survey and that sort of thing,
Yes.
right? And you're like, well, okay. So they may ask questions like, how long did it take for your call to be answered? But that's not really listening to the voice of the customer.
Mm-mm.
I was speaking to someone about this the other day, actually, and one of the analogies that I used to explain it, because he asked me, what's the perfect CX strategy? And I
Oh,
said,
well,
yeah.
that's a pretty big question.
And I was like, well, there's no such thing as a perfect CX strategy,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
the analogy I used to him was like, look at it this way, think about it this way. If you're a brand, you are like a bartender, right? So imagine you're walking into a bar. So the brand is the bartender, and then you've got customers walking into your bar. Now, you could be the best bartender in the world, but if you served everyone a mojito, I guarantee you it could be the best mojito in the world, but I guarantee you some people would not be happy, right?
Right.
Because hey, perhaps I don't drink alcohol, or perhaps I prefer a beer. So
Hmm.
what does that look like? I mean, so like I say, you could be served really quickly. So I'd put 5 stars. I got served really quickly. I could, the bartender could be polite. So as far as they're concerned, they've got their CX strategy right. But no, you haven't listened to me. You haven't asked me what I actually want to drink. You've given me the best mojito you can make, but hey, I want a beer, right? So
Yeah.
so listening to the customer is not just about, hey, yeah, I've got to perfect this and perfect that. It's about actually listening to them and saying, what is it you want? And
Oh, I
that's what,
like that. I like that a lot, and I love the analogy of the CX bartender. That you realize that after this show, I'm going to go over and look to see if CX bartender's already taken as a URL, because that may be the next great brand of customer experience consulting out there, the CX bartender. Tshili, that makes a lot of sense too, because I think there's so many companies that do that, right? That they just think, well, I sent my score out there, or I was kind. And I do believe that there's a lot of just hire happy people and you teach them the skills, right? The empathy, the humanity, that aspect is so vital. It doesn't matter though if the customer themselves needs something that's beyond what that that peanut butter spread of a mojito. Even in what I just described there, the niceness. I was talking to a group of people once, and I was saying, hey, there's this great story of somebody who was really nice to me at the counter, and we had this good conversation. And a dude from New York, and I don't mean to generalize, it just so happened to be a dude from New York, and he said, Rick, that's the last thing I'd want. Give me my freaking hamburger. Let me get the bleep out of there. And I don't want to have any conversation with someone. So exactly that. Understand your customer and listening to them is such a key part of that. And so let's talk about that front line, because you're talking about exactly that. The person that's doing that listening, the person that's the front line. Companies are cutting customer service. We see it left and right now. And I know you and I already know that we see that as a huge mistake, but we live in this world. How can you help companies realize that the contact center isn't this cost center? It's a customer insight center. Back to that listening of the customer's insight centers, and ultimately can become a revenue source.
that's another great question, Rick. And interestingly enough, we one of our mantras, and it's on our website, right? We say, turn your customer service center into a profit center. So
Oh,
from a cost center to a profit center. Um, Coincidentally. So it is very, very important for brands to think about this, right? So let me give you another analogy. And I keep telling this to all the customers and our clients that we speak to. When you're, especially online, in the online world, what you're looking at is your online shop is like a bricks and mortar store. So you mustn't treat it differently.
mhm.
If I walked into your bricks and mortar store and there was no one there, how are you going to sell anything to me? Right? So
Right.
you got to do exactly the same with online, right? So you've got to have people and you've got to be able to serve people where they are and when they're walking into your store, technically. And a great example of this is we worked with a pet food company. We started working with them early last year, and what they did is they had a customer service team in place already. But they came to us and were like, "Hey, look, what can you guys do for us?" So we sat down with them, we had a chat, and we looked at what they were doing. Um, Within a year of working with them, from like January 2022 to January 2023, we had increased. I mean, they were doing about 100K through their customer service team. They had about 3 or 4 agents with us, but by the end of that year, they were up to 300K on the customer service team alone, right?
Oh my. Holy cow.
And as you can imagine, they were very, very pleased. And they were just like ringing me up almost every week saying, "Hey, Chili, can we get more agents?" And I was like, "Hey, you need to calm down. You need to give us a lot more notice than this." Because what they did is they expanded their operation, right? They started looking at all the channels that their customers are coming through. So we help them
Mhm.
do that. We say, well, it's not just phone calls and emails. It's,
Yeah.
things like live chat on your site, speaking to the customers, meeting them where they are and when they are is really important. So being able to look at, if you're speaking to your customers, what time do they like to be spoken to? When are you
Right.
busiest? And all those sorts of elements. And with that, I mean, like I said, the return on investment for them was easily 12 to 15x.
This is your captain speaking. I want to thank you for listening to CX Passport today. We've now reached our cruising altitude, so I'll turn that seatbelt sign off. While you're getting comfortable, hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Love it if you'd tell a friend about CX Passport, leave a review so others can discover the show as well. Now, sit back and enjoy the rest of the episode.
I'm actually curious. So they started at that point. They got the 12, 15x on the end. What was the trigger? So, how did you convince them of the fact that the contact center was this profit opportunity? How did you, and if it wasn't literally you, but how did this come about? What was the idea, the trigger that motivated them to go in what is sort of the opposite direction of what we see, sort of conventional wisdom approach its contact center today?
Well, so it's quite tricky. I mean, in today's environment, people know and that there is an economic decline, and people are talking about recession and things like that. But
Hmm.
what happens then is you do one of two things. You either panic, or you actually take a very real hard look at your business and say, okay, where are the opportunities? And people that invest and look at the opportunities are the ones that do better in the long run. Now, for them, it was a case of they're doing pretty well, but how could they be better? And that's how they actually came and spoke to us and said, look, what can we do that's better? So knowing all the channels that they were using and everything else. And again, live chat is something that is just so crucial, especially to e-commerce businesses, travel businesses, whatever
Right.
industry you're in. If you're speaking to someone as and when they're on your website, ready to talk, they've got questions about your product, your service. If you can answer those questions immediately, that drives conversions, right? And that is where you will start to see real returns on investment because you
Excellent.
actually speak to someone as they're there with their intention to buy. But if you
Yeah.
ignore them, they're going to go to your competitor.
So you and I can continue to convince each other of this, right? We are absolutely the believers there. But I love that story that it's a company that was already growing, already knew it, but knew that they had aspirations beyond the short term. They had aspirations into the long term, and recognized that that's where, by focusing on this particular aspect of the overall customer experience, will net them a longer term results. Let's talk about that front line. You're talking about that the conversation that's there, the people that are sitting at the phones, the chat lines, the emails. That front line is at, well, the front of capturing all the customer insights that can exist in a customer experience in a contact center. They're the ones that are delivering and really co-creating an experience with the customer. So, what are some examples that you've seen of companies do a really good job of capturing that insight? So, not just letting it lie there in the front line, but capturing it, especially those unstructured elements of customer insight that flow through a particular conversation or customer contact.
Yeah. Another great question. What we tend to see is that usually you've got someone at the very top of the business, whether it's the owner or the founder or, head of CX, head of customer support, etc., etc. Now, they're not on the front line, as you say. And it's very, very important for any business that you are speaking to people on the front line. In fact, do you know what?
Yeah.
Spend a day or two working on the front line so you get to
Amen.
understand exactly what is happening on the front line, right? So a great example is we started working with, well, it's an adult toy company, and they were experiencing
Products are products.
products are products, right? And they were experiencing some higher levels of returns, and they actually engaged us to actually help them deal with all the returns
Okay.
and that sort of thing. So we were like, okay, great. So we'll help you with that. That's not a problem. So that's your immediate problem, right? But what else could we be doing? So part of the work that we do is we're not just there to field calls and answer calls, etc., etc. What we're there to do is to do some analysis behind what's actually happening with your business and give you good business insights that you can actually action and work on. And one of the things that we found, and our frontline staff found, was that there were faulty products and there was issues with a number of products. They knew there were issues with a number of products,
Okay.
but they couldn't quite figure out what. So when we did the analysis and we got our staff speaking to people, and we actually proactively went out and reached out to the customers and spoke to them and said, "Hey, look, I understand you returned this product. What was the issue?" And it turned out that the manufacturer they were using had a faulty battery element,
Okay.
the component that they were using across all their products. And by feeding this back to them, they fed it back to the product team, fed it back up. And not only that, we then proactively reached out to people that bought these products and said, hey, there may be an issue with this, do you want to return it, et cetera, et cetera. And people were very positive about that. They were pretty happy that they found out
Yeah.
what the underlying cause was. So that's a just a great
I like
example.
that. I love that, and I can assure you that I'm pretty sure you're going to be episode 125. I forget exactly your number, Chili. Out of that many episodes, adult toys have not come into the podcast yet. So you win. You get to be the first. Well, I won't use the word I was thinking of. You get to be the first to bring that topic in. But a product is a product. An insight is an insight. I'm curious. So more very specifically, you said the front line knew about this, and how was that elevated? How did that get known? Because you had to then engage the front line. How did you know to engage the front line, and how did you extract or really work with them to understand what the problem was?
So what we do, and this is just what we do, right? So we basically have business analysts that are looking at all the data that's coming through. If we see a spike in, whether it's returned products or whether it's, complaints about a particular service, we flag that to our teams and say, right, okay, so next time you get a call or an email or a text or SMS, whatever it may be, about these issues or someone wanting to return a product, let's find out why. Let's speak to them, as we're having a conversation. I'd be like, hey, Rick, so what was wrong with this? And getting that feedback is a core part of what we're doing, because that feedback then allows businesses to get the insight and understand what's going wrong. And also, additionally, it's not just about what's going wrong, right? It's also about what's going really well. So you can invest in
Mhm.
that and say, well, actually, people really love this. Let's keep pushing that. Um, and we then compile reports on that and say, well, actually, these are the common themes that are coming out of this. And from those common themes, you can then start to understand, the real data, the real pain points that people are having. I'm sorry to use the word pain points about adult toys, but
Oh my gosh, we could have a whole side series of jokes here.
yeah. So you understand what I'm saying. So we're talking to people, having conversations, and again, it goes back to the original topic, right? Listening to the voice of the customer and understanding what they want and what they don't want.
Well, Chili, as I mentioned, that would be the first time that that topic has come into the show. And it shows, though, regardless of product, regardless, it really does show that element of listen is not just collecting the information. There's that analyze part of it as well that you talked about with the business analysts. But we're going to stop all business talk here for a little because it can be a little exhausting to be in the business world. You've got clients all over the globe. Perhaps you've done some traveling to make sure and see them and help them advance in their business. And so I wanted to have you join me here in the First Class Lounge. We'll take a little break here, move quickly, and have some fun here. What is a dream travel location from your past?
From my past, that would be Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. It's on the border of Zimbabwe and
Yeah.
Zambia. It's absolutely amazing. It's one of the seven wonders of the world, and it's just honestly, you have to be there, and you'll see it on pictures and things like that. But being there and just looking at it, looking at this wonder, it's incredible. It really is.
Gosh, I really, really want to get to that. The pictures do look beautiful. I've done Niagara. Okay, that's for us in the Western Hemisphere. I want to see Iguazu Falls down in the Southern Hemisphere, and then Victoria Falls. Holy cow! I've heard just spectacular. To hear you say it just makes me
Yeah.
want to get there even more. So, thinking of travel that I want to get to, now it's your turn. What is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
I'd love to go to Australia. I'd love to go to Australia. I haven't been there yet because it's such a long trip and pretty expensive as well. But
Yeah,
it's on my bucket list. I want to go to Australia. I want to visit. I want to see Sydney. I want to see the Harbour Bridge, of
sure.
course, everyone does. I want to visit. I've got friends who live out in Melbourne, so I want to go out there in Melbourne, see that, and just immerse myself because apparently the Australian culture and the British culture are pretty similar. But it's like moving Britain and then putting it in a hot country with dangerous animals. Um, so that's what I expect that.
Yes, yes. Oh, it, certainly want to get there as well. It's a far trip for me as well. What is a favorite thing of yours to eat?
Oh, I love a Boerewors sausage, and it's spelled Boerwors. Um,
Yeah.
it's a beef sausage with like mixed spices and bits. It is absolutely incredible. If you've never tried it, you have to look it up, find it, try it.
Well, I will. And you're the second guest to bring that up. I had a guest from South Africa, and he mentioned that specific role. And that's like not the number one reason I want to go to South Africa, but it certainly has bumped up in the list because he spoke of it so highly. So I understand your excitement around it, and I can't wait to have it. Let's go the other direction. What is a thing you hated and your parents forced you to eat it as a kid?
So there is. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. My parents are from Zimbabwe, and
Okay.
when we visited, there is a worm that grows on these trees, and it's called a mapane worm.
Okay.
And they basically you just basically pick it and you grab its head and you get all the green stuff out, and then it's dried, and then you fry it with salt and oil. And it was a worm to me, right? And was like, that's disgusting. I'm not eating that. But they were like, you've got to try it. So I've tried a lot of foods, and I think them actually forcing me to eat that and try that meant that I've just managed to try loads of different delicacies from all around the world, and
Right.
it's kind of opened my mind up to trying things.
You and I, so chili, that is not my item of things that my parents forced me to eat. But similarly, I'm willing to at least try something once. And you're right. Let's go around the globe, try some things. That's okay. Doesn't mean I have to like it again, but that
Yeah.
openness to try it at least once. So speaking of your travels, let's go back to travel. What is one travel item, not including your phone, not including your passport, that you will not leave home without?
Oh, it's got to be my pillow, my travel pillow. Oh, I love that thing.
Absolutely, Chili. Got to get that sleep in at 100%. Now, Chili, I mentioned act at the beginning, listen and act. And you've told stories of companies that have done that sort of act, but a lot of that choice to act is cultural. Some companies are just very satisfied to listen to the satisfaction scores, but not really do anything about it. So when you've worked with companies in the past, how do you get them to want to act on what they have learned from customer service? So maybe there's some examples of stories that you've experienced of companies wanting to do this, or the other side too, companies that have failed to take that opportunity to act.
Yeah, we've spoken to a number of companies, and again, it comes down to the what are you really engaging us for, right? So if you're engaging us because you've got an issue, let us help you with that, right? So typically people will come to us when their customer service is kind of just falling apart. They're inundated with requests from here, left, right, and center, and they don't know
Right.
how to deal with that, right? But what we do is we like I said to you before, we analyze it. We start working with you. We help alleviate that pain. We get through the backlog for you, and then we start looking at it and say, well, actually, why is that happening, right? And then we'll
Mhm.
advise you and say, well, actually, do you know what? Your busiest periods are X, Y, and Z. So at this point, you need to have X number of staff, etc., etc. And the reason, or it could be a case of the reason you're busy is because something's gone wrong. Your delivery partner has completely failed, and there's so many delays, people are getting in contact with you.
Mhm.
It could be that the airline that you booked through has gone bust. So there
Yeah.
are all sorts of,
Right.
there are all sorts of different reasons why you can suddenly get busy. But the number one thing that I always say to companies is don't ignore it. If you ignore that, the first thing that happens is people start to get really mad. And when they get really mad, they leave really bad reviews.
Yeah.
So the first convincer of anything is just like, hey, go look at your reviews online. Go look at Trustpilot. Go look at your Google reviews, etc. And then when you start looking at those, you'll start to see a pattern forming where people are complaining about X or complaining about Y. Now, what does that do? You can ruin your brand reputation in seconds. But it takes, and if you think about how long it takes you to build up that brand reputation, to have it ruined in seconds because you're not acting is
Yeah.
insanity, right? So
Yeah.
you got to surely act on this. So when we speak to people, we're saying to them, and we're very frank and transparent in everything we do. We say, look, so sometimes we have very frank conversations and say, look at your reviews right now. They're talking about X, Y, Z. If you don't act on that, all that people do, the first thing that person does before they book a service or buy a product from you is they look at your reviews. Are you a trustworthy company? Or what happens when things go
Right.
wrong?
Right.
And it's so important to ensure that even if things do go wrong, that you actually respond to them and show the public and the brand and sorry, the public at wide and your customers that, hey, yes, something's gone wrong here, but this is how we've remedied it.
Yeah.
And when you do that, then you restore confidence in them. So act, act, act. And if they don't want to act, show them what the public is saying and their customers are saying about them.
Show them. I guess you can at least encourage them to act. You can't necessarily force it. And I think that's one of the things that's particularly unique about a BPO is that the customer, and I'm talking about the end, not your customer, but rather the end customer, the one that's buying the product, the one that's buying the service, the one that's buying the experience. They see the BPO as the brand. Right. So they don't know necessarily they're talking to someone other than the brand. And you're then also, when you think of the brand is your customer. So you have these customers on both sides. And you've given me those examples already of how you're helping those brands get better at customer experience by helping them go through those elements of a total voice of the customer approach, how they can listen, how they can act. I'm curious. And we may need to close out with this question. You know, you've worked with a lot of clients, and they've been across all types of businesses, as we've heard, different points in their business growth journey, startups to big companies. At some point, they had to make this choice to turn to the outside for help. What have you seen? What are some of those stories you've seen of companies that recognize they have that need so critical that they turn to the outside for help?
Great question. And one immediately springs to mind. We worked with a company that sell Christmas trees, right?
Okay.
And what they were doing is they'll, all through the year, they start to get orders and they work with companies, other businesses, as well as the public. So orders start coming through, you know, from way back when, like July time, people start ordering their huge Christmas tree for their office
Right.
front and that sort of thing. And then what they were trying to do, and they were trying to be a little bit, well, I guess, savvy with it to say, well, actually, we won't increase our customer support yet until maybe November, December time. And then obviously what happens is when people start ordering their Christmas trees, all of a sudden you get this incredible spike that goes up,
Right.
and all of a sudden it's panic. Now, we always say to people, look, contact us. If you know you're going to have a seasonality or a spike, contact us at least 30 days before so we can get the right people in place for you. So that's a great example. Businesses that have seasonality or where someone's actually done a campaign for also some sort. So,
Okay.
maybe, they've launched a new product, they're offering 50% off, it's a great product. And then all of a sudden everyone thinks, that's amazing, I've got to get me one of those. And then all of a sudden their phones are ringing, their emails are going off, and they're like, oh God, we need help. So that's where we kind of step in. So it tends to be that people haven't basically looked at the future and thought, if we do this, we're going to see an influx in people contacting us. So in that respect, I think the one tip I'd have is think about your marketing, think about everything that you're doing, think about anything that could cause a spike in people contacting you. To be if you want to get into travel specifics, if you know that there's going to be visa rule changes, like in the UK we have Brexit. So
Yeah.
how does that affect traveling to Europe and that sort of thing? As a travel company, when you're thinking about that, what are your customers going to be thinking? You're going to get a lot of inquiries from people who have already booked their holiday, so prepare for that.
That makes a ton of sense to me, and I can see, and it would require a company to have that forward look, and I can see why that would be the case. Tshili, if there's a company out there or a person listening that wants to know more about your approach to customer experience, because even outside of the BPO world, this idea of focusing on the front line, listen and act and everything else, your approach, how would they get in touch with you to learn more? And then also, if there's that company that sees that seasonality, that sees that visa rule change or something along those lines as they're looking forward, how would they get to know more about LTV Plus?
So you can go onto our website, which is LTVplus.com. You can contact me personally on LinkedIn. I'm on there. My name is spelled a bit like a Wi-Fi password, so I must spell it out for you. So it is Tshili, and it's Tshili, and it's Khupe, Khupe. Or just email chili@ltvplus.com, and you can even put chili like the pepper, and it'll go through to me.
Oh, even more so. Well, I'm going to get all of that on the show notes. So for those of you that didn't have your notepad ready as you're on your run listening to this episode and in full energized mode, scroll down. You can see all that information there in the show notes. Tshili, thank you so much for visiting with me today. I loved, first of all, I loved getting to hear about a product space that I don't normally get to talk about on the show and learning the business lessons from that as a result. I did love also hearing about some of those foods that were particularly challenging to you growing up. But overall, just this ability to understand how a BPO can really be that guide towards a brand to help them be able to listen and act and then do better by their customer in the way of customer experience. Tshili, thank you so much for talking with me today. Tshili, thank you for being on CX Passport.
Thank you, Rick. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. If you like today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. Click subscribe on the CX Passport YouTube channel or your favorite podcast app. Next, leave a comment below the video or a review in your favorite podcast app so others can find and enjoy CX Passport too. Then head over to cxpassport.com for show notes and resources that can help you create tangible business results by delivering great customer experience. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.